Hey, and welcome to the ProtoPod, the podcast for engineers, innovators, entrepreneurs, and trailblazers shaping the future. Here, we dive into the cutting-edge worlds of prototyping, aerospace, rapid manufacturing, high-velocity mass customization, and beyond. I'm your host, Jordan Rose. This week, we're joined by Bryan, President and CTO of MessagePoint Media, a leader in digital displays for over 100 transit systems across North America. With 20 plus years in IT and a pioneering approach to managed services, Bryan built his company from the ground up. In this episode, we explore how his team uses rapid prototyping, semi-custom manufacturing, and global collaboration with Protocase as a key partner in bringing fast-turn ideas to life. Hear how one whiteboard session sparked a company shift and what it takes to scale smart in a 24/7 world. Hey Bryan, welcome into the show. Super happy to have you with us today. Been looking through your background. I noticed you've had, prior to being the CEO and CTO of President and CTO rather, of MessagePoint Media. You have an extensive history and background in the IT services sector. I was hoping that you could describe for myself and the audience kind of your professional history and how you ended up starting MessagePoint Media.
Sure. So I came up, I started when I was 13 years old as an IT technician after work. Summers, that kind of thing. Now, at that point, that was, soldering serial cables and troubleshooting stuff like that. And so, from there became the technical manager for some small IT integration companies. And, always ended up in a leadership position, but always kind of came from the technical and engineer side. So, I go back far enough to have been a Novell CNE. And, Microsoft MCSE early on, taught Active Directory when it came out. So that was my previous career. But one of the things that kind of connects that to what I do now is we were, all the companies I worked for were the small local, not the big national franchise and that kind of thing. So for us to be competitive, we were building our own servers, building our own desktop PCs. As we migrated into providing managed services, one of our first ones was backup and disaster recovery as a service for end clients, and kind of installing those backup appliances that could provide an image copy of servers and that type of thing. And so we built those appliances out. So I have a long history of integration / manufacturing. So creating new products, but doing it from as much as possible building blocks that exist. Leveraging what's already out there and being nimble so that we could continue to iterate and improve as we went along. So that kind of defined when I got into digital signage. That was when I had left my position as a CEO of a regional managed service provider, was kind of burnt out on that market. Had the person who ran my Jackson, Mississippi state office had moved into digital signage unbeknownst to me, but he found out I was doing some coaching and consulting for other managed service providers. And he called me up. He said, "Hey, I've got this digital signage thing, and I think I've got something, but I heard you're, doing some consulting. I wanted to see if maybe we could look at product offerings and stuff and figure out how to make this work better." And he came over. We spent a day in the conference room, whiteboarded, tore the business model down, set it back up as a infrastructure as a service or hardware as a service model. And he went back to Mississippi, closed 8 or 9 deals in 6 weeks, said, "Hey, this is fantastic. I want to have you more involved." So I took a small equity position in exchange for continuing to kind of help build it out. And then, the more I built it, and you always fall in love with the things you build. That's why I'm not sure I could really be a consultant long-term, is I would want to have everything I created. But, from there started an Alabama entity to handle the Alabama state. And then gradually the other gentleman wasn't sort of as ambitious as I was. So the Alabama entity morphed into doing basically the rest of the country. And so today we have installations from Bangor, Maine to El Paso, Texas, and from Anchorage, Alaska to Key West, Florida. So about 200 transit agencies now all over the country.
Awesome. So it's really interesting. So obviously you've kind of morphed in, using your gathered knowledge over your career, morphed into this provider of like a full spectrum service for digital signage is kind of how I see it. You mentioned there that, you fell in love with your business now. What is it that makes you love, the offering that you guys have for your customers? What is it about it?
So one of the things about me is, for better or for worse as an entrepreneur, sometimes some of the folks around here would say for worse, I care about everything, all of our services and products we provide, and see them sort of as a reflection of myself and of the company. So if something doesn't go right, if things don't work the way they're supposed to, then I kind of take it personally. And so it's one of the things that started with, kind of connecting dots. The reason we got into the backup and disaster recovery as a service market is because it was, and really was one of the pioneers in creating that type of product, it was my job to go and tell the small business owner that all their data was gone because I was the CTO. And so, when you had to have that bad conversation that, hey, your folks haven't been changing the tape, and, either you don't have any data or the data you have is 3 months old, you have to re-enter everything. And, I had this revelation one day. We'd already been doing monitoring and that kind of thing, but it was like, you know what? These folks, I can tell them a million times, I can give them great software, but if they're the ones who have to change the tape every day and that kind of thing, then the chances of that happening are a lot lower than the chances if I have a team whose job it is to do that all day, every day. And so in digital signage, one of the things I saw, so part of it was, trying to sell just software or just hardware was difficult for the customer to assemble a good working solution, but also they needed design help. I mean, a lot of the stuff there, and to this day, if you walk into a lot of digital signage implementations, you may have really nice, shiny hardware, and then you've got horrible looking, give me my PowerPoint back signage.
I've seen
content.
Those.
And if the content doesn't work, then it doesn't matter how good the hardware is. So when we developed the service originally, and what I kind of fell in love with was the idea of really, as much as possible, provide the entire solution turnkey from start to finish. That lets us adjust the hardware to make the software work better, adjust the software to make the hardware work better, bring content and support resources to bear to help people actually get more use out of it. So, as an example, we have a co-managed and a fully managed service that just as part of our subscription, a customer can just send in a graphic they want to have on their screen, tell us where they want it to go in their network, when they want it to go up, when they want it to come down, and our team will take care of doing that for them. And again, that's kind of that idea of the backup team. I have a digital signage content team that knows our system backwards and forwards, knows every way in which you can set a restriction and a rule. And, for them, it's super easy to go in there and pop that thing in there. But if the business owner or the person there only does it a few times a year, they struggle. They may do it wrong. They may just, I'm not going to set any restrictions. I'll remember to go take it off. And then you come back in February and the Merry Christmas content's still running. So, having that full spectrum managed services, and, the market, as you get to bigger and bigger customers, they don't always want that whole all those different services. So we've over time said, okay, you could have self-managed, you could have co-managed, you could have fully managed. Whereas in the original product was $99 a month. We'll provide the television, the software, the media player, all the content. We'll build graphics and video content for you. $99 a month digital signage. So we've evolved as we've grown to be a little more granular, but we still have a lot of that DNA in that we do everything in-house. We design our own stuff, and we really try to own all the pieces of the stack.
Yeah, that it makes a lot of sense to me. I think offloading that worry for folks for something like digital signage, definitely seems like the right move, because as you've mentioned, with the disaster or backup recovery systems, you forget to manage it, and all of a sudden, you're in a hole. It'd be very similar with digital signage. As all of a sudden somebody walks into your amenity or hotel or whatever, and it's July and the Merry Christmas sign is up. I can imagine that offering such a full spectrum level of service provides very unique challenges in the design of your hardware and software. Can you talk to me about any sort of methodologies that you guys might use in order to tackle those unique challenges and make sure that all those subsystems work well together?
Sure. So, and that's one of the things when I started the company, and for probably the first 3 or so years, we were 10 years old last July. For the first 3 or so years, we were using off-the-shelf commercial televisions, and even originally we were just using the little Android TV boxes you buy on Amazon to watch pirate TV and that kind of thing. And we were stripping them down and plain Android and putting our stuff on there. But what we quickly discovered was, especially as we migrated into mass transit, which is one of our big markets, we've got a couple other big ones as well. But in that space, we had a lot of outdoor displays and a lot of vehicle displays, things you don't just buy off the shelf. And so that's when we really realized we were going to need to do two things, which on the surface seemed very difficult. One is we needed to be able to customize the displays really for the project. So if you go out to existing infrastructure, whether that's in front of a factory and you're putting up an LED board, or whether that is a bus stop, all that stuff's been built. The roof height is set, the level of the concrete set, where things go is set, where people walk is set. So if you try to do a one-size-all-fit solution, you're going to run into problems with things hanging down too far, or screens are going to be smaller than they should be because they're the wrong shape, or getting them attached in the best possible place for the application becomes difficult. So we needed a really big catalog. And I think today we offer somewhere close to 300 different models of digital signage. Now, some of those might be a single-sided or a double-sided version of the same thing, or, this is exactly the same, but with a bigger or smaller screen. But maintaining that and then having commonality. So the only way we can manage that is that we need to have essentially the same system board and everything, no matter what shape or size it is. We need to have the same power supplies in it. So we need to standardize the components as much as we possibly can, which means we really have to control the design. We can't just buy off-the-shelf monitors because, a lot of the shapes we want don't come that way. And even if they did, I'd end up with, one company's controller in one and another company's controller in another. So all of our displays are built ground up as digital signage. And that's really different from a lot of what's out there. So if you go to the average McDonald's, you're probably going to drive through, you're going to see a digital menu board.
Yep.
That's more than likely a Samsung outdoor display that's been put in somebody else's metal enclosure. And, one of the things we have to educate customers about is, the person who made that enclosure never talked to the engineer who made the display. And the engineer who made the display never talked to the person who made the enclosure. And there's these things like airflow and, and heat dissipation and things like that are really important. And that's why a lot of times you end up seeing those very expensive displays having the black spots where they've been thermally damaged and that type of thing. So you really need to design the display as a unit so that you can manage cooling, you can manage where components are, you can make it easy to service. And so for us, it's that balancing act of being almost a custom design house, but then not having our stuff be so expensive that no one could buy it because we're sourcing custom PCBs and we're building either too many of something in order to meet scale, or we have a super high cost because everything has a minimum order quantity, and we're building essentially a military type jet plane every time we're building digital signage. So threading that needle is something that's been a lot of the secret to our success.
Yeah, it's really interesting, actually. I find so much commonality in that as it compares to what we like to do here, in that, we consider ourselves pioneers in high velocity mass custom manufacturing. And very much what you're talking about is making your product mass custom, where those repeatable elements that we would call work elements internally are the mass part. And by fixing those, you can create custom solutions, relatively easily. You mentioned keeping them relatively low cost because you've done the work to standardize everything that could be standardized. So it's very interesting how, that methodology kind of applies, in a different way to you, but in a very similar way as it does internally to us. The other thing I picked up on when you were chatting, you had mentioned that transportation was a big one for you guys. Do you think there's specific pains or problems that the transportation industry runs into with digital signage that you uniquely solve? Like, is there a reason why they're such a niche for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of the classic blue ocean opportunity.
Yeah.
When we came into the market, and we did it almost accidentally, we were doing municipal digital signage locally.
Okay.
So we were working with the Waterworks Board and the library and the park board and the city hall and that kind of thing. And we had some of our customers reach out to us and say, hey, the local transit authority is building this new intermodal terminal thing, and it's going to have these displays, and it sounds like what you guys do. And so we looked at the bid. We had never done anything in transit. We put a bid in on it. We won the bid. We did a lot of things that at the time we had no idea were innovative. It's just the way we thought it should be done.
Yeah.
And then when that project went really well, number one, we got interest in, okay, this is interesting. And then we started researching, and what you had was a lot of very sort of fat, dumb, and lazy legacy competitors.
Yeah.
Who were selling the same amber LED kind of displays they've been selling forever. And hey, these are the 3 sizes you can have, and it can only be black. And software integration, one of the big things was almost all the existing systems, and still to this day, a lot of them don't have any way to report back when they're having problems. So you send the data, you throw the data at them, and the way you find out they're not working properly is that some passenger calls into the customer service number and says, hey, the sign at such and such stop's not working.
Yeah.
And so for us, we saw an opportunity in this market specifically, and it's kind of, we never intended to make this our core market. It's just, there is such a need for it that we've gradually really grown there. And one of the other elements we haven't kind of talked about that we look at, is this a message point opportunity or not, is the ability to take live data from various sources and create real-time displays. So, it's, if you have a restaurant that has a digital menu board, and all they're going to do is make some slides with graphics, and maybe they want those slides to change between breakfast and lunch.
Pretty
That's
easy.
probably not our customer, unless they really want some of the monitoring and that kind of thing. Our customers are pulling data from systems, and they're looking for that to be converted into a layout that makes sense for digital signage, which is kind of an at a glance from a distance medium. So a lot of people try to apply mobile phone or website design to a digital sign, and it's really a very different animal, because you're not right up against it, and also you're just glancing at it. You don't want to have to stare at it like you would your phone to figure something out, and a lot of times you don't have any navigation. So I think getting that all working. And so what we discovered is just, there was a huge opportunity to bring different hardware, to bring better software, to bring better manageability.
Yeah.
And you kind of touched on high velocity, and that's been one of the things that our competitors in the marketplace, some of them have just literally given up, because we don't really pursue, I'm going to patent this, I'm going to patent that. Our thought is, especially as an integrator, there's an off-the-shelf toolbox. What we can do is innovate and iterate faster than our competitors can figure out what we already did. So by the time they've duplicated something we did, we're a year or two past that on to the next thing. Because really, that part about caring about the end result, there's a story that that I tell sometimes when we're talking to agencies. In that Birmingham project, that intermodal project, we were a much smaller company. I was very deeply involved in all the troubleshooting, and it was new software and that kind of thing. So I spent a lot of time in that central station where all the equipment was. And you get to watch what's going on. And I remember one day there was this elderly lady, and it was actually the agency wasn't using our software properly. So the driver was supposed to key in their departing route. It was going to make an announcement. They wait 5 minutes and leave. So the driver actually came in. They just keyed it in, got on the bus, closed the door, drove off. And this poor elderly lady is running, trying to get to the bay where the sign is. You know, she can't move very fast, and she misses the bus. She comes back in the customer service window, and she's just crying because, you know, this is going to be the third time this month that she's late to work. She's going to lose her job. And that was really, I always hold that as a touchstone, that what we do in terms of providing that information reliably and in a way people can consume it is a huge part for people that are dependent on public transportation.
Absolutely.
It's a huge part of them navigating their life. And, you know, sometimes we care more about it than our customer does, because we're very focused on the fact that this product we're providing is a public service, and that it's something people use to navigate their day and to do the things they need to do. And a lot of times the vulnerable people who are dependent on public transit don't have another option. Just call an Uber or call a friend to come pick them up if the bus is late. And, you know, some of these agencies, like the one where we were then, if you miss that bus, it's an hour before the next one comes.
Yeah.
So you miss your doctor's appointment, you miss getting to work, you miss an appointment somewhere else, and there's literally nothing they can do about it. So making sure that the technology is reliable, whether that's making sure the data gets to it, that the signs aren't disconnected and nobody knows, that as much as possible we make the system as resilient so we don't have to depend on people always remembering to do exactly the right thing.
Yep.
To make sure that it really functions. And we've taken that into hospitality and corporate communication and some of the other markets where we're active in. But I think that, you know, if you really want to be able to stand behind the entire product, you almost have to own every aspect, from development to software to hardware to implementation to support.
Yeah, I think that's. I love all of that. I love the fact that it's really all about, at the end of the day, it's about the end user on the ground, right? Mm-hmm. They are actually the customer. They're maybe not the one buying the equipment or the software, but they're the ones that are using it. And I think it's a really interesting, that idea as well about making things mistake proof, because that's another one, again, going back to that idea of mass custom, that's kind of what the standardization does. It allows you to make things mistake proof. And also, again, going back to that idea of velocity, I think it's really cool that you guys are just in the mindset of, hey, let's just innovate faster than everybody else. And, at the end of the day, we'll win because of that. I'm curious to know, I know you guys are an international company. I think around 50 employees, if I'm correct, in 4 or 5 different countries. Those are, I think, very much incredible, tenets to have in your organization. Mistake proof, fast, customers number one. But how do you align such a fairly large group of individuals multinationally to all kind of drive towards those goals or those ideas?
So I think there's 2 aspects to it. I mean, one that is not infinitely scalable is that I am closely involved in telling the story and onboarding people, and even all of our international teams. I make it a point to visit those offices. I try to visit at least once a year to tell that story, to make those connections, that kind of thing. Now, as we grow, that gets harder and harder. But we also, we have a daily stand-up meeting, and I get pushback sometimes from people. Hey, this is a half hour out of our day we're losing, and it's true that 60 or 70% of what you're hearing may not be relevant to you, but the other 20 or 30% is somebody else is working on something that affects you or that you can help with. or that kind of thing, and just keeping that awareness of what all the teams are working on, what the problems are they're having, what they're seeing, so that you don't have, you don't create not my problem, not my department,
Yep.
Silo kind of thing. And a lot of it also has to do with recruiting. I mean, we have a very family oriented environment. We're very clear up front what our expectations are, that, nobody's too good to do something. If a shipping container comes in and it's a rush, anybody who can should go over and help pull stuff out of the container.
Yeah.
There's nothing that anybody here should be too good to do. And, when you do that, you build that camaraderie, and the environment you create in your company reflects on the service and the product that you provide, to your customers. And that can go a long ways. I mean, I remember we've worked with you guys now for at least 6 or 7 years. And, I remember seeing you guys' YouTube videos where you're, making an air cannon to shoot, and, is that necessarily directly related to your core business? No. Does it build camaraderie and kind of that spirit that, we're innovators, we going to solve problems? And, I give our team and our engineering and design warehouse team, they all basically have a toy budget. So, I mean, we have 3D printers. If the 3D printers aren't busy doing jobs, they are welcome to use the 3D printer to make something for their wife or to experiment with something. I mean, you go over there and there's all kinds of gadgets that have come off Thingiverse that are, pen holders and all kinds of things like that. But, the idea is, if you let them use the tool to do something they want to do, they're learning the tool in the process. And honestly, people may be a little more invested in learning the tool when they're making something they want to make than they are if they're making something you want to make. So a lot of it is, pulling it back to your question, a lot of it is that corporate culture. And it has to be a conscious decision. It has to be a conscious decision every day, because it doesn't happen by accident. In fact, by accident, it's going to go the other way.
Yeah, I agree totally. And it's interesting, again, like so many similarities between Message Point Media and Protocase that I see in that, and that, we have what we call our ethical guidelines, and it's kind of our cultural DNA, as we call it. And, customers are number one is on there. And so is the other one that sticks out, from your conversation there, is help others succeed. Right. And it's just that idea of, nobody is above anything, and it's all about helping everyone succeed. It's not my job, because you don't get anywhere. You just breed, animosity and all that sort of stuff. And it bleeds out to the experience that your customers get. So I agree that it has to be at the forefront in everything that you do in every day. I'm interested to know, so you obviously have built this company, got a great culture. Would you have any advice for any, entrepreneurs or looking to be entrepreneurs that are listening to the show, on what you would give them starting out as an entrepreneur?
So one thing that I think has a huge effect in the way that I approach things as an entrepreneur is, and I've been on the other side of this, because in all of my previous companies, I was a minority owner, but I wasn't the majority owner. And the previous company that I left before Message Point, I actually was the CEO of the company for about 4 years. So I was the ultimate leader, but still not the primary owner. And I think you have to decide as early as you can, if your goal is to build something that you intend to stay with, or if you're building something you intend to sell. Because you make very different decisions. And a lot of those decisions are important early on. If I am, I'm very clearly, I'm an entrepreneur in my DNA. If I sold this thing tomorrow, I would have to start something else within a year or two, because there's no amount of going on cruises or traveling or fishing or whatever that's going to keep me entertained. So I know I don't really want to go through the entrepreneurial journey again. So I'm going to keep this and keep building it and that kind of thing, which means I don't worry about, are we making money on every single project? If we're learning something from it, if we're developing a new technology, if we're investing in what will grow the business in the future, then, what the P&L said, as long as we're making money, we can pay people and that kind of thing. But polishing the P&L for an investor having been through this with my previous company, where the owner's goal was to sell the company for enough money to go fish for the rest of his life. Every decision came down to, what's it going to make the P&L look like this quarter? What's it going to make the P&L look like for the year? What's it going to look like when they run the ratios for the investors? So I think there's nothing wrong with that approach if that's what you want to do. Mm-hmm. But I think one of the things some entrepreneurs do is they end up in the mushy middle. Mm-hmm. So they don't look at it as, okay, this is what I need to take out of it right now. This is where I'm trying to go. If I make an investment now, as long as it's going to pay off later, it doesn't really matter, as long as I can keep the bills paid, keep the lights on, and that kind of thing. Or are you really trying to show that meteoric growth hockey stick because you want to eventually sell the business? So knowing that and being very clear about that, in fact, that's one of the things when we do interviews, we tell people that up front, because I think people have been through that experience of being in a business where just the top line financials and the metrics matter more than the service and the outcome.
I think that's excellent advice. I asked that question a lot, and that's one of my favorite answers, I think. Message Point Media.
I would say if you don't mind, one other
Absolutely.
quick thing. The other thing that I think has been it's been a key part of my success, even back in the previous companies, but especially here, is because we are kind of, we're talking about manufacturing, and especially with what Protocase does and probably what the audience is interested in. I think one of the other key things is clearly understanding what to do where. So, from our standpoint, I mentioned we call ourselves a manufacturer, but in a lot of respects, we're an integrator. So, do I go create my own custom PCB and my own custom chip to drive our ADA button, the button you have to push so that it can tell people that are vision impaired when the thing's coming? Or do I go find something in the market that maybe it wasn't intended for that, but it can do the job that I can buy? Do I do prototyping, really rough prototyping with 3D printers in-house, and then go to a Protocase, and then maybe if it's 1,000 pieces, then I look at my overseas manufacturers. So being very intentional about where you do each one of the things. And the same thing, you mentioned the multinational team. We do development in Pakistan. We used to do development in India. We learned that, I can get amazing resources for less money than it would cost me here in the U.S. And for that job, it doesn't matter where the person is. And then we originally were doing it in India, but we learned that Pakistan has a lot better job retention, where we weren't turning over programmers just because they got a better offer in the cyber park.
Right.
So, finding the right place to do each one of those things and finding the right level to do them is a huge part, I think, of our success as well.
Very well said. Again, I think very, very sound advice. Bryan, if folks listening are looking to find Message Point Media, where would they find you guys?
Sure. So our website is mpmedia.tv. So that's like .television. So no .com. We do also have messagepointmedia.com, but that's a big mouthful. So, if you go to our website, you'll see the thing to kind of know about us, again, calling back to what we talked about earlier. The folks who come to us, the folks who are our best clients, they're looking for a little bit more of a concierge service. So they don't just want to put a TV on the wall and run PowerPoint on it. They may want somebody who can pull together a dashboard for them. They may want a display that's an unusual size, or they may be looking for newer technology. So because we don't have a huge warehouse full of last year's model, we're able to very quickly adapt. And our world, especially in LED displays and some of those, it evolves very quickly, but also we kind of take a agile methodology to hardware. So we get a minimum viable prototype out there, we test it, we get feedback on it, we iterate the design until we polish it to a fine sheen. So I think if you're looking for someone who can look at a challenge and say, okay, what we're looking for is to do this with digital signage or to do this with communications, and you're looking for a partner who's going to walk down that journey with you, help figure out the pieces, help figure out how the data gets there, help create the visuals if necessary, present the information. That's what we really do better than anybody we found in the market. So that's kind of our niche client. And we got a lot in public transit, but we also have a fairly sizable practice with, heavy manufacturing organizations that need to do employee communication in the turnstiles and the break rooms and for safety and performance metrics, that kind of thing, as well as in hospitality where you have large resorts and things like that have a lot of screens and oftentimes are very spread out and need to communicate to different audiences at different times.
I love it. I love what you guys have been doing, and I'm excited to keep an eye on you moving forward and as you continue to grow the business. So thank you so much, Bryan, for coming on.
Absolutely. We really appreciate what you guys do, and thanks for the opportunity to join you.
Awesome. Until next time, bye-bye.
Okay. Take care.